Tū matatia, tū ramatia, te tuapapa o te matatu Aotearoa. Ki runga, ki raro, ki uta, ki tai. Koia ko te manaakitanga, te whanaungatanga, te pono, me te whakamana I te ako. Haumie, huie, taekie. E titi, e tita, e nā iwi katoa. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai ki tēnei piringa rauhuia, ki tēnei huihuinga kōrero, whakatau mai rā ki tēnei tere nā rauhuia, leading change processes in education. Ko Roseanne London tōku ingoa, ko Aotearoa o ngā tohu mātua mō te matatu Aotearoa. My name is Roseanne London, and I am one of the senior advisors at the Teaching Council. The Educational Leadership Capability Framework states that leadership in educational organisations in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is essentially influencing others to act, think, or feel in ways that advance the values, vision, and goals of the organisation, and the learning and flourishing of each of its learners. Leadership is also about seeking sustainable and ongoing improvement and innovation. This series of symposia recognises that curriculum change is constant, at times coming from within the learning context and other times from external sources. Either way, teachers both in positional leadership roles and those not in positional leadership roles are key to leading the success of those changes. In today's symposium, we will explore what the teacher's role is in leading change processes in education. Nau mai kia piri, nau mai kia tata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Janice Carroll Lind. Throughout her teaching career, Janice has worked in a range of positions and locations as a primary school teacher, early childhood teacher, resource teacher special needs, and as a teacher of children with behavioural challenges. In the tertiary sector, Janice has taught across the initial teacher education, graduate and postgraduate programs at Massey University College of Education, mainly in the areas of inclusive education and mentor teaching. Janice then moved to Wellington as the Principal Advisor Education at the Office of the Children's Commissioner. Then, returning to teacher education, Janice's immediate past role was Director of Research and Postgraduate Programs at Te Rito Maioha, which is where I first met her as I engaged in my own postgraduate studies. Now, Janice is enjoying semi-retirement as an independent contractor consultant in education, where she tells me her best job is volunteer teacher aiding at her granddaughter's Year 3 class. Welcome, Janice.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Tehenui te awa, ko Carol te ingoa o te whānau, ko Ngā Motu te turanga waiwai, NRA ke kapiti toku kāinga ināianei. Ko Janice Carroll Lind toku ingoa, he tangata turiti ahau, he kai kiri mana mātauranga o, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. My presentation today is exploring the principles and practices of leading effective change, and in particular, curriculum change. It's generic to all areas and stages of the curriculum, and you just need to transfer it to your own setting and curriculum areas. It's fitting to start with the Teaching Council's leadership strategy, which can be downloaded from this Rohuia website. The strategy states that leadership is about influence with purpose and taking people and ideas to new places and mobilizing them to tackle tough challenges and thrive. Further to these leadership symposiums, the Teaching Council is piloting 4 e-learning modules that aim to support aspiring school and early childhood leaders in growing their leadership capabilities. So first, I'd like to give a shout out to my colleagues, Furry Isaac Sharland, Fia Collins, and Emily Nelson, who are co-writing those modules with me. It's impossible to cover everything in a 30-minute presentation, but if interested, you'll have the opportunity to delve deeper into some of the content that I'm talking about today in those leadership modules that I believe are being launched in this Rohuia leadership space in April. But designed to support the leadership strategy, the Education Leadership Capability Framework is a set of high-level guidelines with its 9 educational leadership capabilities describing what leadership looks like in practice across the sectors and in 3 different spheres of leadership influence: leading organisations, leading teams, and leading curriculum or an initiative. And while the principles and practices we're talking about today are relevant for all leaders, I'm pitching my focus to the sphere of expert teacher, leadership of curriculum or initiative. And I chose this sphere because the teacher whose class I help out in is an expert teacher. She's very skilled in teaching structured literacy and maths, but she said she'd want to learn a whole heap more about effective communication strategies before she would feel brave enough to lead out the new curriculum initiatives with her colleagues. She's not alone in this. Her feelings are confirmed by Thomas and Nuttall, who argue that often teacher leaders are confident to lead children's learning, but sometimes they lack the theoretical and conceptual skills to lead adults' learning. Now I'll just go back. Leadership means different things to different people. Keith Gint asks us to consider whether we view leadership as a position, a person, a result, or a process. And the difference between these 4 approaches is perhaps why leadership is so difficult to define. David Giles talks about leadership as being a relational act and a way of being. So while I'm focusing on the relational and communication aspects of leading change initiatives, I understand that the next speaker, Jason, will talk more specifically about what implementing curriculum change looks like in his school. Your role as a leader of curriculum change is to promote the improvement of teaching and learning. Pedagogical leadership, or leadership for learning, encompasses everything highlighted in this slide. Siraj and Hallett suggest that pedagogical leaders promote continual professional learning and development for colleagues through reflective practice and collaborative dialogue and learning. New Zealand's best evidence synthesis on leadership and student outcomes confirms that pedagogical leadership has the most significant impact of all on student achievement and well-being. This best evidence synthesis by Robinson, Hohepa and Lloyd is a great resource for those of you who are leading a curriculum change, and it's as relevant today as when it was first published. Unfortunately, nobody can control changes because they are uncertain. The only thing a leader can do is to lead the organisation or curriculum initiative through that period of change. For those of you leading out a change initiative for the first time, this uncertainty can be scary. VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
ठीक है ना मैं पूछ रहा हूँ
The term
ठीक
originated in the 1990s at the US Army War College to describe the post-Cold War world. It has since become a framework used in many fields, including business, economics, and leadership. The key to thriving in a VUCA world is to understand each of the 4 elements and to develop strategies to navigate them. Leading change may take you out of your comfort zone to start with because it involves bringing conflicts to the surface, questions long-standing beliefs, and requires new approaches. When change is perceived as a threat, people feel challenged, which often results in resistance directed to the person leading the change. Consequently, leaders may face professional and personal challenges, which is why, with tongue-in-cheek, Heifetz and Linsky warn that to lead is to live dangerously. I was thinking of a friend when I developed this slide. She teaches in a small rural school and has recently lost her job as a reading recovery teacher, as that funding is now being diverted to the school's new literacy program. Research is clear that individuals often resist change before they can move forward. At the start of the change process, they may not perceive that the new situation will be an improvement over the current one. Instead, they're acutely aware of potential losses. People frequently avoid adjustments if they can delay them, shift the responsibility, or seek assistance from others. The more profound the change and the greater the amount of new learning required, the more resistance there will be. Leadership is a relationship between those who aspire to lead and those who follow. It's the quality of this relationship that matters most when trying to lead out change. Gillian Rodd describes leadership as being about motivating others to followship. That is, effective leaders motivate, inspire, and persuade others to realise their goals. Inspiring followship in others is based on an understanding of who the followers are, what their needs are, and what resources they can offer to the group. Also, Heifetz and Linsky advise that teachers must help people to change both their hearts and behaviours. And this links back to leadership as being a relational act. Solutions arise when those facing the problem work together to become solution finders. However, the issues must be internalised, owned, and resolved by the relevant parties for lasting progress. So ask yourselves, what do you want from someone whose direction you'd be willing to follow? And would you follow you? Leadership is important and it does matter, but probably the least understood is the role of followers without whom leaders cannot exist. So how might you bring your followers along with you as you lead out your change agenda? This video clip is an oldie and a goodie, and it highlights the importance of you influencing other teachers to follow you as you lead out the curriculum change.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. See, it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader.
Perhaps you don't need to dance around madly like the lone dancer, but as you saw in the video, affecting change does not happen through the actions of one person. To get things done, leaders must enable and empower others to act. Driving change is not about telling people what to do. It's about empowering them to embrace the change for themselves. It's helping them to examine their options in the light of their intentions. An effective change leader encourages their team to generate, test, and implement their own solutions and methods while providing support and direction as required. When teachers are involved in setting goals for themselves and in creating strategies for their professional development, such as in learning a new curriculum initiative, they bring more energy to their work and contribute to the growth of the organisation as a learning community. Jim Collins is best known for his Good to Great books. This first who, then what principle is part of his Good to Great framework. So to lead a great curriculum change initiative, make sure you have the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the key seats before you figure out where to drive the bus. Always think first about who and then about what. Think carefully about who your allies might be in helping you to drive your change initiative. Another principle of leadership is sustainability. And rather than give a New Zealand example of educational fads that have come and gone, I'd like to share an Australian one. When visiting the 8 schools located in the Aboriginal APY lands, at one school we were shown into a large storeroom full of beautiful literacy resources. The APY lands are in the far northwest corner of remote South Australia, and because of its remoteness, the government provides incentives for teachers to work there, mostly on short-term contracts. So these brand new unused resources in this room were being wasted because the teacher driving that literacy program had since left the school. The moral of the story is that for any curriculum initiative to be sustainable, the leader must be strong in commitment. Kouzes and Posner tell us that personal values drive commitment. So for sustainability, there must be someone in charge who deeply values the particular curriculum initiative and so is more likely to last the distance. That said, nobody is indispensable, and the bus analogy is worth remembering here. If you've got the right people around you, there'll be others in the team able and willing to step up into the leadership role. As stated earlier, a good leader, is one who's able to grow leadership by developing and empowering others. Without the buy-in from others or the necessary coaching to step up into the leadership role to maintain the continuity, any curriculum change, no matter how good it is likely to fall over. If you remember, the Positive Behaviour for Learning program recommends an 80% staff take-up for the program to be successful and sustainable. In an early childhood leadership development project that I was involved in, we deliberately had 2 teachers per centre take part for 2 main reasons. First, it was not as lonely when they could support each other in implementing the new changes. And secondly, the dual participation was important to the process of succession. PLOC provides a robust framework for training new leaders on their essential roles and responsibilities. PLOC stands for Planning, Leading, Organising and Controlling, which I hasten to add is not about controlling staff. These 4 functions summarise the main activities that leaders undertake as part of their responsibilities. Planning sets the stage by defining objectives and outlining the steps to achieve them. Leading motivates and guides the team members towards those goals. Organising ensures that the resources and tasks are structured efficiently. And finally, controlling monitors the progress and implements necessary adjustments to stay on course. So you might like to consider how you could use this PLOC framework in your role. Leah Mether offers 5 principles for communicating and leading through a change process. First, clarify your approach to navigating the change. Define the key messages and then communicate this clarity to your team. Explain why the change is necessary, why it matters, and why it's beneficial for them to get on board. Engage empathetically with your team by showing care and curiosity about their feelings and concerns. And this approach builds trust and helps you better understand their responses to the change. Reducing unexpected issues by anticipating them before they escalate helps you to lead more effectively. Navigating change can be difficult, but through these changes, both you and your team can choose how you respond. Reminding yourself and your team of this choice involves candidly addressing mindsets, focus, and behaviour. And while it's important to empathise with your team's current situation, you also have the responsibility to hold them accountable for their mahi. Support your team by encouraging them to find their own solutions. Schedule one-to-one meetings for coaching conversations that prompt reflection and future-focused inquiry. Avoid rescuing or providing quick fixes. Instead, ask questions that help them to navigate the curriculum challenges. Effective coaching empowers your team to take responsibility while ensuring that they feel supported and cared for. Leading through change requires sustained commitment, consistency, repetition, and reinforcement. Many changes fall over due to being overmanaged and under-communicated. You need to keep banging your drum, That is, you need to be consistent in your own communication, behaviour and actions to build trust so that your team will follow you through those periods of uncertainty. There are many models on giving feedback. There are quick, simple ones like the BOF model, where you outcome the behaviour, outcome and feeling for positive feedback. And for negative feedback, you outline the behaviour, outcome, feeling, and the future that you want going forward. Here are some general guidelines for leading courageous conversations. Stay hard on the issue and soft on the person. I statements help to facilitate challenging conversations without sounding aggressive or confrontational. For example, say, I disagree, rather than you're wrong. Ask questions for context and clarification to avoid making assumptions. Method calls this getting curious, not furious. Communicate promptly and regularly to address issues early and avoid escalation. In other words, don't avoid the elephant because it only grows in size. And it should go without saying that you need to lead these discussions in a culturally responsive way, paying attention to tikanga and creating safe environments and practices. Method's 11 steps start with inoculate first. So let them know it's going to be a tough conversation. For example, this may be a challenging conversation and you may not like what you hear, or this is an uncomfortable topic to raise. This warning allows them a moment to prepare for what is to come. Set the ground rules for how the conversation will take place. You could say, I know you'll have questions, but it's important that you listen to what I say first, and then you'll have an opportunity to explain things from your point of view. Be genuine. Explain why the conversation is important. For example, you could say, we need to discuss the way you communicate with some of your colleagues because I value your contribution to the team, but it's having an impact on your relationships within the team. Be specific about the behaviour, not the person. For example, you could say, several colleagues have mentioned that your communication style in our curriculum meetings seems abrupt and aggressive. Provide examples to demonstrate your point, such as, this morning when Sue asked whether you'd finished the unit plan, you snapped back, no, you'll get it when it's done, without even looking up from your phone. It might not have been your intention, but it was perceived by me and others as aggressive. Describe the impact of their behaviour. So address their motivations and drivers rather than your own. For example, if they value relationships, discuss how their communication affects their relationships with their team members. Be empathetic, but firm. For example, I appreciate you've been under a lot of pressure lately and it's a stressful time of year, but we're a small team and it's important we're able to work together in a respectful way. Perhaps people may feel they can communicate openly with you. They must be able to do this, and it's difficult for them and you to do your job if they can't. Own your part and take responsibility for your actions. If you should have raised this issue with them months ago, tell them that and apologise. Ask for their feedback and thoughts. While it does not excuse their poor behaviour, allowing the recipient to provide reasons for their actions is important for understanding the situation fully. It's also important that they feel heard. Outline what change needs to happen, identify alternative behaviours and be clear of the consequences. What I need from you is to be more mindful about your tone and the way you communicate with others. If you haven't met a deadline, take the time to explain your reasons. And if you do snap and speak harshly, acknowledge it and apologise. Get their commitment and finish with a clear course of action and shared understanding of the conversation. Make sure you're both on the same page and there's no ambiguity. And if appropriate, schedule a follow-up conversation to track progress. Dialogic conversations are a form of conversation where participants engage in an open and honest exchange of ideas, aiming to understand each other's viewpoints and co-create meaning. These conversations emphasize active listening, mutual respect, and the suspension of judgment. And today I'm presenting two forms of dialogic conversations that may help you when leading change conversations. The first are open to learning conversations, and these are specialist conversations centered on sharing a problem and co-construction of a solution that all parties engage in. They work well when using conflicting views as a starting point for developing those shared meanings. OLCs examine the quality of thinking and information used when assessing situations, understanding causes, and determining actions. You, as the leader, demonstrate openness to learning by actively seeking ways to verify and enhance the quality and validity of perspectives and decisions. Respect and trust are fundamental to these conversations, as is detecting and checking assumptions or preconceptions that, if unchecked, can block dialogue. Further to the steps outlined in this slide, if you want to know more about how to lead open to learning conversations, you'll find sample question sets in the e-learning modules that I talked about earlier. Congenial conversations are characterized by conflict avoidance and reassurance that activities and problems are normal, but shifting from congenial but relatively superficial conversations to collegial conversations that are more productive for improving learning also entails risk-taking and trust. Congenial discussions don't rock the boat, but collegial discussions, like open to learning conversations, often use conflicting views as starting points in developing those shared meanings. As I mentioned in an earlier slide, leaders often experience a dilemma between pursuit of their change agenda and protection of their relationships because of the perceived risk in opening their practice to scrutiny. Here are some sample question sets for framing deeper conversations when leading out a curriculum initiative. This first one has suggested questions for examining instructional practices, such as what happens if we all teach this concept differently. This slide shows questions for identifying patterns in students' learning and connecting that learning to practice. These questions are examples of examining assessment practices within your curriculum team, and there are further questions for reflecting on your group processes. In summary, leadership requires you to be resilient, to have self-trust, and to be clear about your purpose. It's also about bouncing back from failure, and there will be times when things do go pear-shaped. During periods of change, support for you as the leader is crucial. Do not isolate yourselves. And here are a few examples of avenues of support, but you will know many more networks that are relevant for you, your curriculum area, and your context. Rod Davis, an old colleague and friend, is currently acting principal of Manukau School. Rod has experienced a lot of change in his long career and was very willing to provide some advice based on his own experiences. Luckily, he reiterates some of the points that I have made. So I'd like to give Rod the last word on leading a change initiative.
I want to talk to you about change. Now, the trick here is to buy into it, because if you're going to make change, you've got to feel as though you're part of it. You've got to feel as though you have a role to play in things being different. This is the trick. So what that means is How do you go about getting people on board? Well, you let them know they're valued and you let them know they're part of this change process. Could be big change, little change. So as long as you're not being shortchanged, it's all usually quite a positive. And this positive will soon become part of the norm. But I can only tell you that what we can learn from is our tamariki from our children, because they don't change. They still arrive at various times before 9, after 9, wanting breakfast club, always late, and sometimes amidst their swearing and fighting, they do a bit of learning. It's all part of change. But for us, we need to feel that we are part of the process. Okay, so that could be curriculum change, it could be management change, it could be big change, little change, but our aim is to make you part of the change. Always feel as though you have a role to play. And that way, it's not just being done to you, you have ownership of it. You're part of it. It's your change. Embrace it.
Ngā mihi. Thanks for listening.
Kia ora, Janice. Thank you for sharing with us your knowledge and understanding of the important aspects of leading curriculum change and the at times overlooked relational and communication aspects of leading change. I'm confident that the insights you have shared will contribute to our knowledge kitties. So thank you. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Jason Ataira to all of you. I met Jason through the Porirua East Kahuiako, where he was in the principal group and I was an ECE rep. His relational approach aligns nicely with what Janice has already shared with us. Jason began teaching in 2002 and has more than 10 years of principal experience. Through this, he has gained and continues to gain a range of tools to support leading change. Jason contributes to senior leadership roles within the Porirua East Services Network, PACE Digital Charity, Porirua East Kahuiako, RTLB Cluster 28, and most recently with the New Zealand Pacific Principals Association. And today, he will be exploring change leadership through an implied Indigenous people's perspective, touching on the importance of being values-based and how to use some of the principles of Tautai Oli Moana's Wayfinder approach to leadership. Thank you, Jason.
I ngā iwi, i ngā reo, e ngā mana. Ka nui te mihi atu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tapu ai o unuku tōku maunga, ko wairau tōku awa. Ko kura haupo tōku waka, ko rangatane tōku iwi, ko ikurangi tōku maunga, ko kākera tōku moana, ko take tumu tōku waka, ko ngātangi ia tōku oire, ko Jason Miro Ataira tōku ingoa, ko puapu mātua o te apete tairangi. Greetings to everybody. Welcome to my very short presentation, which is a perspective on driving complex change. I'm usually pretty straight up in saying it's my perspective, and it doesn't mean that it's right, but it's what I think, and you're welcome to take what you need and leave what you don't. I'm just going to start with people and things that are important to me, and thank you, Roseanne, for that introduction. On the left there, you can see my beautiful family. That's my wife. Kids change a little bit over time, so that little pop-it there with my wife, I just attended her Pacific orientation at Victoria University last night. I don't know why she wants to be a teacher. I think it's her mother's influence rather than mine. And down on the bottom right there, you see the little blonde-haired boy in the bottom right-hand corner watering the pumpkin, and our beautiful Rarotonga is my son, Tūmaka, and he's just finished the Coast to Coast as part of his college team. So he's been very busy while Dad put tents up and fed him and kept him happy. And on the bottom left there, dressed as Max from Where the Wild Things Are, is my youngest son, Rupuama, named after his grandfather. And he's a year 8 at the school that we teach at here at Tarangi School, where I'm the principal. Just building on what Roseanne just added. So I did an exercise many years ago, and the thing I remember, I don't remember exactly when I started it, but the thing I remember is it took me 2 years to be brave enough to put it on paper. So now when I do a presentation, I share it. So why do I do what I do? So everything I do will be to co-create a society where we all benefit from the full potential of each other. So when people ask for help or for me to participate, it's a no-brainer for me. And my personal aspirations are about addressing the personal impacts of Māori urbanisation and Pacific assimilation, which have impacted my life and my family as we go. I wonder if we might just take a couple of deep breaths in and out, because that was a lot of information being thrown at you. And I'd love to say that's not going to happen again, but stay tuned, it's about to happen again. So just take a couple of deep breaths and center yourselves. We are going to pause, and I'm going to get you to stop and write a few things as we go. So you've got time to make a note. The outcome of today's session is not to give you answers, but my goal of this session is for you all to come away with a couple of questions for further inquiry, and also to leave some breadcrumbs throughout the presentation to get you started if something sparks your interest. So don't panic. I'm not taking you through all of those. These are some effective Western models, tools, or approaches for leading complex change. They are some of the tools in my leadership toolbox that I draw upon alongside many others. And like any good builder, you need to pick the right tool for the right situation. So the more tools you've got, the better tool you'll find to fit the situation that you're in. One of the things that can be challenging from a cultural perspective is that all of these were developed without an Indigenous people's perspective and without Indigenous people's value systems. And so they suffer from that contextual naivety from a cultural lens. So our job is to contextualize these for our communities and schools. And that's whether you're coming at it from an Indigenous people's perspective, whether you have Māori or Pacific in your community, whether you're urban or rural school, whatever your context. We don't just take everything as they come to us. We literally need to sit there, digest it, and make sure it's right for us. And if not, make it right for us. So, how do we contextualize models? One of the things is starting with who, and it was really nice to see Janice talking about that in her presentation previously as well. So always start with people first. And then we also look at the values that shape the behaviors of those people within an organization. I've given an example there of a document called Yavu that the Ministry of Pacific Peoples have published, and they list some of what they call the Pacific values there. You will have a different list. Whatever your community and school values are, how we use those from a cultural lens become important. So when we're looking at an action or our next steps or whatever we're doing in our school, it's really important that whatever we're doing maintains or enhances all of the values that you espouse in your organization community. It's not, if you ever get to a position where it's going to increase caring for one group but decrease respect for another, if those are two of your values, then you haven't arrived at the right conclusion yet. And from a Western viewpoint, that can become a little bit more frustrating, because from a cultural lens, concepts around hui or talanoa are not time-bound. The focus is on best outcomes no matter how long it takes. And sometimes it's generational to get to that best outcome. There's a great saying, which is not mine, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And that sort of encapsulates that really, really well. So we're going to try, as a really brief example, contextualizing a Western model with an Indigenous lens. So many of you will be familiar with Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. And he has a beautiful TED Talk, which is linked in there. And if you haven't seen it, it's old, but it's still good. And he talks about many of our start on the outside of that circle with the what we do, and then we gradually work towards the middle. And sometimes we don't get to the why. And I've just given a brief explanation about what that might look like from an educational perspective. But we all know the fantastic saying in Māoridom about what is the most important thing of all. It is the people, the people, the people. And so when we look at this model, and we've already had a discussion from Janice, I've already said it myself, that people are at the center of what we do. When we look at Simon Sinek's Golden Circle model, you can see really clearly that the who is not clear. And so from a cultural lens, we definitely want to start not with the why, but with the who. That little image is something that we created as our school. And we tried to visually represent what our community is made up of and what's important to us. So we talk about being world citizens. We have our treaty obligations in there and relationships, but you can also see some of the Pacific patterning because we have a large Pacific community in our school as well. And we have the phrase, hea ha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. So we start with the who before we go to the why, and then we carry on out. So when you're looking at some of these Western models, I'm going to show you a model shortly which looks at which starts from an Indigenous perspective. So it's not a Western model that's been converted. It is an Indigenous view of leadership, a Pacific model of leadership. And we're going to make connections to some of our Western models, that there are some similarities that we can draw upon that you may want to use, you may want to explore further. But the model we're going to use or look at from here is the Wayfinder framework, which has been produced by Tautai Ole Moana. If you look down in the bottom corner, there's a link to that. Click on that and it'll take you right there. This wonderful little paragraph that I'll read to you in just a moment, as a school leader, takes about a year, and a professional learning group, when I did it, of about 8 to 10 people, to work our way through it with fidelity, and so that we're questioning ourselves along the way. We don't have a year. I think we've got about 14 minutes left or somewhere around there. So we're going to see where we can get to today. I'm not going to unpack all the parts. We're going to look at little sections. We're going to pose some questions. And then I'm going to pause and give you a chance to have a think about what stood out from you from that portion of it. So I'm just going to read it to us now. Tautai is a waka or va'a captain, wayfinder or navigator who is able to see deep sea weather conditions beyond the horizon with no land in sight. And that is a great metaphor for complex change, isn't it? Tautai read the signs to know their place of origin, where they are positioned, and where they are sailing to. Tautai bring people together and draw on their collective strengths to achieve agreed goals for the expedition. I'm just going to take every part of that paragraph section by section, and we're going to have a brief discussion about what that might look like, not in terms of answers, but questions that might go through, might follow from that, and what models might support it. And it's not in the order of how I would necessarily introduce change, but it is in the order of our story there. So our first slide. Tautai is a waka o va'a captain, wayfinder or navigator who is able to sail through deep weather conditions beyond the horizon with no land in sight. If you're going to do this, it requires bravery. So what is your source of courage and motivation as an organization, but also as an individual? Where are you drawing your inspiration from? Because you need to have a heart full of hope. You don't start a journey destitute and thinking it's going to fail. Who's gone before you, maybe on this pathway that you know of? And what's the little bit more that you're going to do by yourself? So you know somebody's got you a certain distance, but you're going to take it that step further. What is your why, and how have you used the golden circle to shape your conditions for success? I'm going to pause there for about 30 seconds. Have a look at that slide and jot down a thought, a question, a comment, that's generated from that little piece there, please. As a presenter, it just feels awkward, those long silences, but I'm sure you're using that time appropriately. So carrying on with our story, our description. Toltai read the signs. As leaders, how did you sharpen your skills? Where are you exposing yourself to alternate ideas, thoughts, and opinions? How are you able to be the best you can be to enable others to flourish and thrive under your leadership? So being prepared so that you can see the signs or recognize them when they come up. How have you developed others around you to manage those conversations that you aren't invited to? And those will happen, the meeting after the meeting. What are your indicators to tell you when the journey is on track or not? And how have you considered some of Noster's dynamic change principles? For those of you who aren't familiar with Noster's dynamic change, if you click on that link after the presentation, he has a wonderful rubric that he breaks down. Initially, when you first read it, it looks like an assessment tool for how you got it wrong. But once you get past that and you read it a bit more deeply, you'll see that it prepares you for going forward and helps you read the signs as you're on your journey as to what's working and what's not, and suggests some things that you could try to get you back on the right path. Take some time. What's a thought, a question that stood out for you? All right, carrying on. Toltai know their place of origin. Are you bringing yourself and your beliefs with you on this journey? What are you holding true to on this journey? What are we prepared to let go as they've had their time and served us well? Have you locked in what's not changing as much as what is changing, and why? There's a link there with a phrase about considering antiquated, classical, and modern knowledge and skills. That comes from a wonderful woman called Heidi Hayes Jacobs, and she talks about that there's stuff that we've done in the past that was okay for that time, but it needs to stay in the past, and it's time to let that go. She then also talks about what have we done in the past that actually is just as relevant today as it was then, and we need to keep, and that's classical knowledge and skills. And then finally, we talk about modern knowledge and skills, which is some of the new information that's coming towards us. And it really helps you understand what you need to hold true to rather than throwing everything out before you go on this destination or this trip that you're heading towards. Firm knowledge of your origins gives you an anchor point. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've come from a Pacific perspective. And very true in a Toltai situation where our direction and our position is determined by where we left in relation to our bodies, where the stars are in relation to our shoulders, where the sun is shining, where the tides and winds are blowing from. And so it's in relation to a place that we knew the position of before we go out. If we don't know our starting point, it's a difficult journey to begin with. Take a minute. Write down a point, a thought, a comment. Next slide. Toltai know where they are positioned. So how do you know where you are on the journey in any point in time? As a team, as a junior, how do you know where you're positioned in terms of energy and motivation? Is the place you're in a good place to accelerate the change process? Or is it a good place to rest and recover? Do we need to change our intended pathway or even our destination as a result of the information we have? So again, we're reading signs to determine where we are currently. Why and how will you know when is a good time to change? How are you using the no complaining rule to guide discussions towards hope? The no complaining rule, it sounds like it's a bit rough on people. It's not quite what it says. So the no complaining rule talks about having an established set of processes and protocols that we can be problem identifiers, but actually, if all you're going to do is identify the problem, then you're complaining. There's a responsibility on us all to not only identify the problem, but suggest some solutions or some ways forward. So if the problem is I'm not getting enough release time or I missed out on my release time, that's the complaint. The no complaining rule says when I come and say, hey, I missed out on my release time, could we combine some classes and I can take some extra kids and somebody else can take some extra kids and then we can share some time out of class. So you've got a solution in place and it's always geared towards problem solving and always geared towards hope. Take 20 seconds, have a think about, write a comment about that slide. All right, Toto, know where they're sailing to. Have you broken the challenge into smaller, manageable parts? What are your markers along the way? How have you communicated these and how have you grown or maintained your positivity ratio? How have you celebrated when you reach a marker or a milestone? So if you know where you're sailing to, you'll also know destinations or milestones along the way of your journey. And they're always good positions to stop and reflect. Positivity ratio can be used in many different ways. The way I tend to use it is around communication. So it takes a ratio of about 3 positive comments to 1 negative comment for people to maintain the same perception of an organization or a system. If you have a ratio smaller than that, it will decline. And the challenge with this positivity ratio is it's much easier to maintain than it is to grow. Once we have a negative view on a position, a change, a direction, we actually need to get the positivity ratio to about 8 to 1. So 8 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. And we need to sustain that so that people's perception of the change comes back into that hope mindset. So you can see 8 is tough. 3 is manageable. But if we don't keep an eye on that communication and keeping things positive, it's a really hard position to come back from. Take a moment, record a thought. Tautai bring people together, and you've heard this repeatedly today as well. First of all, do people want to work with each other? Have you spent time building your team, and how did you do that? Have you considered the adoption curve and the bridges and barriers each group pose to another? So it's not just about your position, but it's about your position in relation to other people in the staff. Many of you will know the adoption curve in terms of the innovators, the early adopters, and so on down as we go through the bell-shaped curve. You can view that in many ways. One thing I found really helpful is to not identify it as a static position, but identify the group that's in the best position to move another group forward. And so I tend to find if it's 2 groups beside each other, so early adopters and adopters, early adopters are best positioned to move adopters along in the change process. That's a bridge. If we have innovators trying to work with adopters or even laggards, what we find is that that gap is a barrier and it's too hard. So you'll get your innovators frustrated at the slow speed and being held back, and you'll get the laggards understand why they're trying to drive so fast and can't get a mental image of where their next step is from that group. So being really careful and understanding that those positions have bridges and barriers are really useful. I also think it's really easy for us to label the laggards and say, you know, they're the ones holding us back. Remember, we want to value their input. So those laggards are the people who are examining constantly the classical and antiquated knowledge that's already in your community or in your school or organization. They might need some help letting go of some of the antiquated, but they're the ones who are going to make sure that you don't throw everything out, that there is value in things that you've already got. At the other end of the scale, sometimes our innovators can appear disrespectful of some of the knowledge and skills that we already have and may head off and lose some valuable knowledge, skills, or information along the way. Take a moment and just reflect. Okay, Tautai draw on their collective strengths. That's the collective strength of everybody in the organization. So does everyone have a role to play? Do they feel valued in the role? Did they have some choice in the role that they chose? Are their strengths and contributions recognized? And are they recognized in the way that they like it? Some people don't like public praise. And instead of your intent being to praise and embrace them in the process, some people may feel as though they're being singled out and won't like that. Is it being done with people or to people? And how are you monitoring your perception reality gap? Perception reality gap varies, and this is the hard thing. As a leader, what I think is going on my school and what's going on in my school has a space between it in terms of whether I'm accurate in terms of what's going on or less accurate. And in different conditions, especially throughout change, that reality gap will increase and decrease at different times and from person to person. And so once upon a time, you might have felt as though we had a very small perception reality gap. But by the mere fact that you're going through a change process, especially a challenging process, that perception reality gap will tend to fluctuate. And how will you know when your perception is becoming distance from reality? Who's positioned well to let you know that? How are you gathering that information in ways that people can be honest about whether you're moving too fast or too slow? Take a moment and reflect on it. Okay, Tautai want to achieve agreed goals for the expedition. Have we got agreement before we started that something needs to change? What evidence do we need to gather to show this so that people agree that yes, something does need to change? From there, what will success look like once we get to our destination? What are our agreed methods of working on our journey or our expedition? Is our institutional agility ready for the scope and sequence of the change? Institutional agility is the speed at which your organization can move from from initiate to implement to embed. And essentially going from initiate to embed, the faster we can do that means we're more agile. It may be that your organization is not very agile at this point in time. It's not the end of the world. It just means it might take you longer to get to your destination. But as a leader, you might decide to spend 6 months working on the agility or the institutional agility in your organization, because it might only take a year for that change to happen after you've increased your agility first. And so always a good thing to think about what's our preparedness for change and our ability to embed new practices into our classroom programs and across our school and community. Take a moment. All right, last slide. I know. Phew, we got there. How do we apply this to change in literacy and maths? So first of all, I think it's really important to understand that really not much has changed. We know our people remain the same and they're the center of our focus. We take our people with us. When we get to our destination, we want to recognize ourselves when we get there, because if we've changed who we are, there's an argument to be made that was that change worth it if we're different people when we get there? Our intent remains the same. We all want the best possible outcomes for our learners. Nothing's changed there. Change is constant. Nothing has changed there. We do our best. Once we know better, we do better. Contextual naivety. Externally driven change suffers from contextual naivety. And our job is to contextualize this new knowledge. No matter who's giving us the information, it's our job to contextualize it for our space. And then finally, speed of change. Some people might think this is a bit controversial because people can impose a perception on you about when change must happen. But the speed of change is actually determined by each organization. We just talked about institutional agility. If you think you've arrived at your destination and it's not embedded into your teacher practice, you haven't arrived yet. And so the question is, should we be doing this with our community or to our community? And if we're going to do it with our community decides the speed of that change, not anybody else giving us a deadline. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my presentation there. My understanding is Rose is going to explain the breakout rooms, but if you wanted to fire some questions into the chat, we'll be skimming and scanning the chat and hopefully answer a few questions before we wrap up at the end of the session. It's been my pleasure to speak with you today, and anything else you need, I'm sure Roseanne can support you. Thank you, Roseanne.
Me take mata, Jason. Thank you for sharing with us your knowledge of leading change in a way that is true to who you are and your values. I feel quite privileged that you accepted my invitation and found the time in your busy schedule right at the start of term 1 to share your understanding of how you apply coaching, relationships, service-based, and Tote Oli Moana's Wayfinder tools to successfully lead change in your school. It's a real tonga that you have shared with us today. Thank you. Before we close, on screen now is the remaining symposia in this series on the role of teachers as leaders of curriculum change. The next session takes place on the 1st of April from 4 till 5:30 p.m. with a topic of educational leadership for curriculum innovation. It will focus on the role of leadership in curriculum reform and delve into how leaders can inspire and support their teams through vision setting, strategic planning, and fostering a culture of innovation. You can use the QR code on screen now to register for this or for any of the upcoming symposia. You can also access this through visiting the Rauhia Leadership Space on our website. We'll close now with a karakia. Kua e ki runga, kua e ki raro. I rongo whakairihia ki runga, kia tina, tina. Homie, hui, tai ki e.